Wars are not that way. And today is Yom HaZikaron, when we remember the 23,816 soldiers and victims of terror who fought and died defending Eretz Yisrael, our beloved land of Israel. One of my favorite stories about the IDF soldiers is about a soldier who was going home for Shabbat from his army base. And he stood at the side of the road and he was hitchhiking, trying to get a ride home. An Israeli pulled over and said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to this and this city." He said, "I'm going there too." He threw his duffel bag in the back seat, jumped in the front seat of the car. He drove about an hour to that city. When he got there, the man said to the soldier, "Where should I drop you off?" He said, "Just drop me off at the bus stop and I'll take a bus to my home." He drops him off. The man pulls out, and shortly after he pulls out, the soldier realizes that he left his duffel bag in his back seat. By the time the soldier got home, his mother said the man had called. He saw his name tag, and he said, "I have your duffel bag." So he called him right away, and they made up that on Sunday, when he goes back to his army base and he goes back to work, he'll pick him up and take him back to his base. Sure enough, on Sunday morning, he picked him up, took him back to his base, and dropped him off, and this time he remembered to take his duffel bag out. But when he took his duffel bag out, he was thinking to himself, "I thought I would go home, my mother would wash all my dirty laundry, I would have fresh clothing for the next few weeks. But now, I'm going to have to recycle my old dirty clothing." When he got into his barrack, in the unit, in the army base, he opened up his duffel bag, and to his great surprise, he saw that all of his clothing was washed, pressed, and folded by the wife of this man who drove him home. And on the top, there was a bag, a little plastic bag with fresh baked cookies, and a note. And he opened up the note, and the note said, "Dear Chayal, dear soldier, thank you for letting me be your ima for a day. Ba'ahava, with love." And the woman signed her name. Our soldiers are brave young men and women who stand on guard day and night to protect us, the land of Israel, and the Jewish people everywhere, are our heroes. Now, it's interesting that the army is called the IDF, which means Israel Defense Forces. I don't know of any other army that's called Israel Defense Forces. And why was it so important that in the very name, Tzva Haganah L'Yisrael, that the word defense should be emphasized? And the reason is very simple, because in Judaism, we believe in self-defense. Jewish law says if someone comes to attack you, hashkem v'hargo, rise up and kill him first. Do not allow someone to kill you. On the other hand, God forbid, the Torah says we're never allowed to take revenge. We're not allowed to live with anger, with bitterness, with resentment, and we never are allowed to hate. As a matter of fact, in this week's Torah portion, it says, "Lo sikom v'lo sitor." Do not take revenge and do not hold a grudge, but rather you shall love your neighbor as yourself. As someone once said, that holding a grudge against someone is like letting your enemy live in your head rent-free. Or another famous quote says, holding a grudge or anger towards someone is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. We only harm ourselves when we hold a grudge or when we hold bitterness and resentment. And therefore the Torah says, do not hold a grudge. And not only shouldn't you take revenge, but you shouldn't even hold a grudge. And Rashi explains, what does it mean to take revenge? So Rashi says, someone asks you to lend them something, and you ask someone to lend you something, and they say no. And then a while later they come to you and ask you to lend them something. Revenge would be if you say, well, you didn't loan it to me, I'm not going to loan it to you. And whether you say it or you think it, but if you say, I'm not going to help this person because they didn't help me, that's revenge. That is forbidden. What is a grudge? A grudge is, I'm not going to be like you who refused to lend it to me. I'll lend it to you even though you didn't lend it to me. That's not taking revenge, but it's holding a grudge. And both of these things are prohibited in the Torah. Rather, the Torah says you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But here's the question that the Maharal MiPrague asks. He says, I don't understand. When I came to you for a loan, I needed your car, or I needed your bicycle, or I needed your plow, or whatever I needed to borrow. Rashi actually gives the analogy of an axe or a sickle. And you said no to me, that wasn't a sin. But when you come back to me for me to loan something to you, and I say no because either I'm taking revenge or holding a grudge, now I committed a sin? Why am I any worse than you? You also refused to give it to me, but yet you did not violate a sin. And the Maral Prague explains something very beautiful and profound. And he says this follows. When you go to someone and say, can you loan me something? Whether it's a material item or money or whatever it is, and they say no, you don't know why they said no. Maybe they don't want to share their brand new car with you because they're worried it's going to get ruined or it's going to get into an accident. Maybe for something else right now. You don't know the reason. You have to judge them favorably. They didn't necessarily say no out of anger or out of hatred or out of resentment towards you or ill will. Maybe they just are very controlling of their things and they can't let go of their items, but it's not personal. But the minute you make it personal and you say, well, you didn't lend it to me, now I'm not going to lend it to you, now you're harboring anger. You have no problem loaning your object to that person. The only reason you're refraining is because they didn't lend it to you. So your motivation is resentment towards that person. That's where the Torah steps in and says, no, you're never allowed to have resentment, and therefore you cannot take revenge and you cannot hold a grudge. The amazing thing about the Israelis and the Jewish people on a whole is that we've suffered so much over the centuries, so much anti-Semitism, so much persecution. And in the land of Israel, tens of thousands of soldiers died defending our country. Yet when you go to Israel, you see the spirit is a joyous, happy spirit, a spirit of life. People don't walk around bitter and angry. And the same thing is true with the Jewish people. We don't walk around self-pitying ourselves. We go on and celebrate life, and on every occasion we say, L'chaim, L'chaim. Even though we've lost so much, and in our generation, the Holocaust, last week we commemorated Yom HaZikaron, 6 million. But the survivors went on to build life, to create beautiful families and communities, and come back to Eretz Yisrael in 1948. That's because of this week's parsha that teaches us don't walk around with anger and bitterness, but rather, as the Torah says, Kel Kana Hashem, God is a God of vengeance. Whenever we mention the 6 million, we say, Hashem Yikom Damam, God should avenge their blood. We don't take revenge. We leave that to God. We have justice. If someone commits a crime, we have to hold him accountable. We have defense, Israel Defense Forces, but never Israel Revenge Forces, because revenge is in God's hands. God will right the wrongs. God will punish those who are deserving. And with that healthy mentality as a nation, as a people, and more importantly in our own personal lives, like Joseph and the brothers, when the brothers came to him and they were embarrassed, he said, don't feel bad. Hashem had a plan. It was all for the good. Who am I? Hatachat Elokim ani, am I in the place of God? That's the healthy mentality. Don't carry bitterness or resentment. If Joseph would have carried bitterness and resentment towards his brothers, he would have never risen to power in the land of Egypt. We are all the flock of Joseph. We are all like Joseph as a Jewish people. We only rose to prominence and greatness because we didn't have a mindset of self-pity and feeling sorry for ourselves and anger and resentment. Because when you're angry and vengeful, you become paralyzed. As we know, the word anger is one letter away from danger. It's like when you put your car in park and you hit the gas pedal. It makes a lot of noise, but you can't move. People who are angry or consumed with bitterness, with revenge and vengeance, they're like their brain, their being, their body is in park. And they spew a lot of anger and make a lot of noise, but they can't move forward in their lives. How is it that after 1945, 3 years later, we came back after losing 6 million of our brothers and sisters, and we were able to start the process of rebuilding Eretz Yisrael? 3 years after coming eyeball to eyeball with the angel of death. There's one answer, because we as a people know there's a God above. He will take care of the wicked. He will punish them. We will focus on justice. We'll hold those Nazis accountable. Nuremberg trials, Eichmann trial in Yerushalayim was very critical for the healing of the Jewish people. We believe in defense. Stand up and protect your life. But we never carry bitterness or anger or hate. And that's a very powerful lesson we have to learn in our personal lives. I would like to conclude with a story, true story. There was a woman by the name of Devir Emanuelov. Her son Devir was a soldier in the Israeli army. And in 2008, the war broke out with Gaza. And she was in touch with her son who was in the army, and she said, listen, Devir, if you go into Gaza, call me, send me a message. And she said to her son, send me a signal, send me a text and say, I'm watching over myself, and I'll know that you're going into battle. Sure enough, Saturday night, she gets a text. Dear Ima, I love you. Take care of yourself. and I will take care of myself. And she knew that her son went into battle. Tragically, the very next day, she heard the news that the first soldier was killed in the Battle of Gaza, and his name, Devir Emanuelov. The woman, Dalia Emanuelov, the mother, was heartbroken. Just a year earlier, she had lost her beloved husband, and she said she felt like she was slapped across both sides of her face. She was crushed. She went to the funeral of her son like a zombie, numb. She just couldn't stop crying. And she began the Shiva process in the year of mourning. And she was very angry. And she said, God, how can you do this to me? How can you take away my beloved husband and my beloved son in the very, very same year? One night her daughter called her, and her daughter said, there's a concert tonight in Yerushalayim. A famous singer, Meir Benai, is performing. You need to get out of the house. You're so depressed. Come with me to the concert. She said, I really didn't want to go to the concert, but my daughter wanted me to come, and I wanted to spend time with my daughter. She went to the concert. A big, beautiful stadium with outdoor arena with 8,000 seats. 5 minutes before the concert starts, the lights are dark, concert didn't begin. She feels a tap on her shoulder. And Dalia Emanuelov happens to be a preschool teacher. And she turns around, she sees a little adorable 2-year-old boy with blonde hair and blue eyes with the biggest, cutest smile. And she looks at this little cute boy and she says to him, Shalom, how are you? And he says, Shalom. And she says to this little adorable boy, do you want to be my friend? And he says, Ken. And then she says to him, do you want to sit next to me? And the little boy shakes his head and says, Ken. Just as she's about to offer him a seat, she hears a man from 2 rows behind call out to the boy, Yosef, bo elai. Joseph, come to me. Bo teshev liyad Devir. Come sit next to Devir. She hears the name Devir. She turns around. She sees a husband and a wife sitting at the concert, and they're holding a little baby in their arms. And the father's waving to the son, come sit next to me, next to Devir. She gets up and walks over to the couple and says, hi, what's your names? And they introduce themselves. And she says, what's the name of your baby? And they say, our baby's name is Devir. And she says to them, do you mind if I ask how old he is? And they say he's 6 months old. And she says to them, was he born after the Operation Cast Lead, Tzuk of the Gaza war? Or was he born after? And they say he was actually born after the war of Gaza, after the outbreak of the war at Tzuk. And they say, why do you ask? And she says, why did you name your son Devir? And the woman started to cry and said, I actually never told the story to anyone. But when I was pregnant with my son, I went to the doctor, and the doctor took an ultrasound and said, unfortunately, there's an abnormality with the baby and the fetus, and there's a high chance that the baby will not be born healthy. And she said, I went home and I was crying. I was devastated by the news. And when I came home, I turned on the TV, and right when I turned on the TV, it was Chadashot, breaking news, that the first casualty of the Gaza war fell in battle, and his name was Devir Emanuelov. And I cried out to Hashem, and I said, Hashem, please, I'm praying, help me, make my child be born healthy. And I promise you, if you give me a healthy child, I will name my child, my son. She knew she was having a son. I will name my son after this brave young soldier, Devir Emanuelov, who died in battle. Sure enough, she said, 6 months ago we gave birth to this beautiful baby boy, and he was perfectly healthy. And I kept my promise, and I named him Devir after this first soldier who died in battle. She said, I've never told this story to anyone, but now that you ask, I'll tell you why we named him Devir. Mrs. Dalia Emanuelov started to weep uncontrollably, and she said, I am the mother of Devir Emanuelov. The 2 women hugged, embraced, and cried on each other's shoulders uncontrollably. At that point, the father stood up and took the baby and put it into the arms of the mother, Dalia Emanuelov. And he said to her, Devir sholech elach chibuk gadol min hashamayim. Here, Devir wants to send you a big hug from the heavens. And Dalia embraced her, the baby, Devir, and felt the loving hug of her son in heaven. Today, on Yom HaZikaron, let us all feel the hugs of all the soldiers who died, and let us hear them whispering into our ears. And their whispering words are, we died so you can live. Live life with joy. Live life with love. And most importantly, never hold anger, resentment, bitterness, or a grudge, but rather always share love for your family, for your friends, for one another, and for the Jewish people. May all the neshamot of those holy, sacred souls, both victims of terror and soldiers who died on the front line, may they be elevated. May they watch over the Jewish people in heaven as they watched over us here on earth.